So, I'm back in my closet recording voiceover sooner than I thought I was going to be, because I actually accomplished more than I thought I was going to this week. Did a lot of things that I had on the checklist pretty quickly. I think just because I'm going back to work next week and I'm trying to cram in as much development time before I'm worn out every day from working that 9 to 5. The first thing I did was just fix a few bugs with the game controller and the way rounds advancing is handled. In the last video, it was pretty obvious that the text that would appear on screen was not correct based on the round that you're on. So that stuff was fixed, but there were all super minor fixes. I don't really have any footage of that process. From there, the real new dev started. And from what I started on there was sound effects. I thought that the game was feeling pretty dead without any sound. And I think even the few sound effects that I've added have been super helpful in just getting, a kind of better game feel, making it feel more alive. I kind of implemented these effects in two different ways. Some of them are handled in a sound controller, which is just like an empty game object that has an audio source for each sound it controls, so that they can all be played separately, one over the other. And whenever one of those sounds needs to be played, they can be accessed by another script and played. The second way that I implemented these sound effects was by making a prefab that holds an audio source that will just play a clip on awake and then destroy itself. This second way I used for mainly the death noises, like the dino death and the player death, and that was just because they allowed the sound to be kind of completely separate from the status of the enemy game object or the player game object when it got destroyed. The first way kind of was dependent on things, the game object still being around to access the sound controller and play those sounds. So the first effects I added were a throwing sound for when the player shoots, an impact sound when the rock that the player is throwing hits anything, whether it's the map or an enemy, it's the same sound. And then two death sounds, one for each type of enemy. Actually, three death sounds, because the volcano also has a death sound, but it's an explosion to go with the death particle effect that the volcano has. After these were in, I also actually added a player death sound, a volcano firing sound, and a health pickup sound, all of which I think just provide some good player feedback and game feel. And I also, because the game was feeling so nice, I updated the camera shake a little, just to be a little more shakier when a dino is killed, because I felt like the screeches they made, you needed a shake to match them. So with all those sound effects added in, and some music that I actually made like about a month ago, here's what starting up dinos and playing around sounds like. After the sounds, I started working on the first pickup of the game, which is something I'd been meaning to add for a while, but I kept getting delayed and pushed back. So the first pickup, Health, is now in the game. To start, I downloaded a free sprite sheet that has some spinning orb sprites on it, and I used a green one because Health is obviously green. They're not great. They're not really the look I'm going for. They're not steamy enough for this kit, but I think they're good enough for now. There's a lot of sprites in the game right now that I'm going to replace eventually, but, you know, they get the job done. So basically all I did here was add a collider to the spinning orb sprite once it was fully animated, and I just made that a trigger. And then I also made it so that when the player enters the trigger, they gain 20 health, and that health is capped at 100, which is the max health of the player. And then once the health is transferred to the player, the orb is deleted, but right before it's deleted, it spawns a green particle explosion, which I think really did add some steaminess. Got this game kind of feeling like a sauna, and what does a sauna need? Obviously, guns. I've seen John Wick, I know that. So from here, I started working on 2 more pickups for the player, to give the players some more options in ways they want to take out dinos besides just chucking a rock. The first weapon-related power-up I added was the Tri-Shot. The idea here is pretty self-explanatory. Instead of one shot, it's tri. So every time the player shoots, there are 2 additional rocks being offset from the original firing angle of the original rock by just like a few degrees, giving the weapon a kind of shotgun effect, allowing the player to do more damage to like a group of enemies coming at them, or more damage to one ranged enemy at a time to knock them down faster. The reason I started here was because the elements of this weapon are kind of the same as the starting weapon, but now obviously it's just there's 2 more of the original bullets being instantiated as well, going in slightly different directions. That being said, I never really changed the way the player was firing at all, so I did have some minor roadblocks when developing this power-up, but for the most part it wasn't too bad. The orb sprite is the same as the health orb. It's from the same pack, but this time it's just red. The bullets are the same the way the original weapon works, besides some minor adjustments to the script, and the only challenges really here were that I didn't quite understand velocity and quaternions in Unity at the start of the process, but now I kind of do, and it's kind of trash that it took this for me to understand it, because I took plenty of physics classes in college. After a while, though, I got everything figured out and working. So before starting on the second power-up, I also added a timer that will make sure the power-up you pick up will only last for about 5 seconds, and then you switch back to your normal rock throws. It's still a little buggy when it comes to picking up power-ups right after each other, so I'm going to have to rework that eventually, but for the time being it does limit the power-up to 5 seconds. After the Tri-Shot, the next weapon I added was the laser, which is actually completely different in the way it's set up compared to the other 2 weapons, besides the power-up itself, which is the same orb sprite as the other power-ups, but in blue with the same animations and the same way to pick it up and particles and stuff. This weapon is actually set up as like an invisible, empty game object with just a collider set up as a trigger. And the way the laser is actually shown is by having a trail renderer attached to the game object. This is the first time I'd ever worked with the trail renderer component, and I actually thought it was a lot easier to work with than the particle system editor. The upside of this weapon is that, unlike the rocks, this projectile is not destroyed on contact with an enemy, so the player can shoot a beam through a line of enemies and injure them all. Giving you kind of, different pros and cons to each weapon. I also added a different colored particle effect to this weapon and a unique laser firing sound. I didn't have to update the firing sounds for the Tri-Shot just because it was still firing rocks. So it's the same sounds when you hit an enemy or when those rocks hit a wall or anything like that. So once the new laser effects and sounds were added in, then both the power-ups are ready to go. Next up, what I really want to work on is the game controller and the spawning system for enemies. Right now, enemies are randomly spawned anywhere on the map, which means that enemies and scenery can overlap with each other, which is just kind of janky and kind of ugly, and sometimes actually even game-breaking. Like if a ranged enemy spawns inside a wall and you can't hit it, you just can't get past the level. So I definitely want to fix that, but I'm not sure how much progress I'll be able to make on that coming up. Hopefully some when I have some free time from work, but we'll definitely see. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. I'm gonna let some gameplay play in the background with all the sounds and stuff added. Yeah, thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one.